Right, good evening everybody. Could we start with apologies for absence?
Chairman, I have apologies from Councillor Susan O'Brien.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest before us tonight? Oh, sorry, Peter Curling. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a non-pecuniary interest in item number 6 as a doctor of Harefield Academy.
Thank you, Peter, that's noted. Agenda item 3 is to approve the minutes of the last Cabinet meeting, pages 1 to 10. Are they agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. And agenda item 4 is to confirm that business marked part 1 will be considered in public, and that's agenda items 5 to 9, and the business marked part 2, agenda items 10 to 11, will be held in private. The first item then is agenda item 5, the Mayor's Transport Strategy and Transport for London Interim Annual Spending Submission 2018-19. Councillor Burrows.
Thank you, Leader. Before I move to 5 recommendations on page 12, I'd just like to say that the report before us this evening is following the draft publication in June of the Mayor's own London Transport Strategy. So, to protect the interests of Hillingdon and our residents, the Council should forward our comments to GLA, as we are obliged as a Council to use TfL Interim Local Implementation Plan funding to actually get the projects and the programmes in line with the Mayor's strategy itself. Now, the LIP is the mechanism used by the London boroughs to deliver this plan, and the funds come through TfL. Now, as a Council, we are required to prepare and submit this to TfL by the 20th of October, hence why it's before us this evening. And I would just like to reiterate again and draw to everybody's attention recommendation 2, just to reiterate that motion approved by full Council on our parking requirements as a borough and our car ownership. I know you are going to mention other elements within the body of the report, Leader, and so I will leave it there by putting this forward before Cabinet for acceptance with the recommendations on page 12. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Simmons.
Thank you, Leader. I just want to make a specific reference to what's highlighted on page 17 under item 7 of transport impacts. It's something which is reported at a number of different points within this document, and that's particularly about air quality. Now, we know this is something which our residents, in common with residents across the rest of London, are particularly concerned. Even more so, perhaps, in Hillingdon, because in addition to the very high level of car ownership, which reflects both the prosperity of the borough but also the geography, we also have a number of motorways, a number of railway connections, and, of course, the big source of air pollution, which is the airport at Heathrow. And what I'm particularly mindful of is that the Department for Environment are currently saying that they wish local authorities to look at how they can improve air quality. There is some funding that's being made available at a national level to do that, and clearly the expectation in the context of London is much of that will happen through the Mayor. There's also a risk that that is seen as an opportunity for central government to make decisions, like expanding airport capacity, and then leaving local authorities to struggle with the consequences when it comes to managing air quality. And when we look across the rest of our neighbours in Europe, for example, it's common for local authorities that have these kind of issues to manage to have significantly more authority and powers to deal with them than is the case in the UK. So an example being the authorities in Paris able to close the town centre or restrict the amount of traffic for periods of time to allow air quality to recover. And I think we do need to be quite bold in our argument, not just to say these are the things that we will do, absolutely rightly, within the context of the Mayor's strategy, but that if we are going to be able to make the difference that we need to for our residents on air quality, then we need significantly more power to deal with the sources of pollution. And if we look at those parallels, it will be on the scale of being able to say the Council will close Heathrow Airport to all traffic until air quality has reached an appropriate, safe and breathable level again. And that would be regarded in most other countries as just an entirely normal thing for the local authority to be able to do. So I think we do need to be very robust in saying, unless we have power and authority on that level to look after the air quality of our residents, then much of what is being talked about, whilst worthy, looks like it's doomed to fail.
Councillor Mills.
Thank you. I think one of the tests for any mayor of London is to recognise London is so different on the outer boroughs compared to the inner boroughs, and that to try and have a strategy that reflects that is a requirement. And therefore, to have a strategy that just assumes that what may be very applicable within the sort of what used to be the inner London authority area doesn't and will not work in places like Hillingdon. And I think we also need to have a confidence that the support that we've had in the past in terms of the LIP programme is going to continue, because as a borough we have utilised that with our own budgets and with other monies that we have obtained to do all the sort of town centre work. Now, the danger is that if the LIP budget starts to get siphoned off because he believes that Hillingdon isn't playing his strategy game, then that inevitably puts more pressure on us to use our own resources, or in reality puts pressure for us not to be able to do as much across the whole range of town centres that we have done in the last 5 or 6 years. But I just wondered whether, Leader, you think it might be worthwhile, in terms of the final submission, just putting in the example of, as real evidence of the travelling issues by public transport. As we know, there's this consultation going on about police stations, and just having Hayes as the only police station in the London Borough of Hillingdon. And as I've made you aware, there are some parts of our borough where by public transport alone it will be quicker for a resident to go to Scotland Yard than to go to Hayes police station. And maybe that just illustrates how poor some of the public transport is in Hillingdon, and he ought to be his strategy ought to be addressing that rather than some of the other things that he's got in mind.
Thank you. I think returning to the airport issue, it's encouraging on paragraph 13 here that the strategy expresses concern that the 3-runway Heathrow would have severe noise and air quality impact with undue strain on the local public transport and road networks. Taking this into account, the strategy mentions that alternative airport expansion options should be considered. On this point, the Mayor is broadly aligned with the Council's own views on the impact of the 3rd runway. It's also aligned with our views when we were given the options of Heathrow or Gatwick. Whilst the Labour Party couldn't make that decision of that nature, this administration were quite clear that Gatwick would be the preferred option for cost and environmental damage. That is the preferred option. The Mayor is broadly in line with that, which is good news. A little bit more conciliatory, as it says in 14, the Mayor will continue to oppose expansion of Heathrow Airport unless it can be shown that no new noise or air quality harm would result. That's a big ask. Indeed, it's a big ask that 80% of all Londoners by 2041 will be making every trip on foot, cycle or public transport. If you can imagine those additional hundreds of thousands of passengers going on holiday on a bike, on foot with their luggage or public transport, never mind the thousands of additional workers that will be going to the airport, walking in the middle of the night, and all the freight that comes in and out. Now they need a pretty big bike, but I'm sure they'll manage somehow. So there's a lot of oddities within this, but the major point I think that's coming across is a one-size-fits-all approach is not right for London boroughs, particularly outer London boroughs the size of Hillingdon. Okay, with those comments, are the recommendations agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 6, Harefield Academy licence to assign a deed of variation. Councillor Bianco.
Thank you, Leader. Well, this is something, well, unfortunately, we have no say in. We have to grant this, just as we had to grant the original lease in the first place. When a school becomes an academy, the land which is ours, we have to grant a lease to them, which we did when Harefield Academy was formed in 2005. And as you can read in the beginning of the summary, that was an early version of the academy leases that have evolved a bit since then, and it contained an absolute prohibition on assignment. And what's happened, of course, is that Harefield Academy Trust have joined another trust, Mellor, and as a result, they need to sign the lease, and currently they can't. So this is to allow that by way of a licence to assign and a deed of variation. And there is a recommendation, two recommendations, at the top of page 26, which I move.
Thank you. Councillor Simmons.
Yeah, just for Cabinet's information, and particularly residents who may be concerned about some of this, important to make clear, the Mellor Educational Trust was in effect the original sponsor with whom we did the lease. And that educational trust has grown out of their experience at Harefield. They've gone on to sponsor some other schools and set up a trust. And essentially, in order for it to be associated with that, rather than the original organisation, they need to have this deed of variation. So in practice, particularly for children who are attending the school, it shouldn't mean any difference to them. They should continue their educational journey undisturbed.
Recommendations agreed?
Agreed.
Agenda item 7, page 29, dynamic purchasing system, transportation of children with special educational needs. Councillor Simmons.
Sounds very exciting to describe the dynamic purchasing system. What it is a means of obtaining the transport that we need in a more efficient way for children principally with special educational needs and disabilities to get them to school. And I recommend that we accept the two items 1 and 2 on page 30 as recommendations.
Is that agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 8, page 33, the council budget, 17-18 month 4 revenue and capital budget monitoring. Councillor Bianco.
Thank you, Leader. Well, here we are, month 4 of the budget monitoring, which is July, and showing a net underspend of 375,000, which is a good step forward and an improvement, significant improvement on the previous month 3. There are 8 recommendations, and there's an addendum sheet which adds 2 further sub-recommendations to recommendation 8, if that makes sense, and that's on here. And no doubt, Leader, you will touch on those when you go into your explanation. Anyway, I'll move those 8 recommendations as amended by the addendum. I think it's probably worth noting that on page 36 is the summary of expenditure on revenue, and you'll see that one of the important things I think to note is that where general fund balances are currently expected to total by March 18 at over 42 million, and that particularly I think good news at this point is that the savings that we're looking for in this year of 15.5 million, the vast majority of those have now been either delivered or are well on track. And for that to have occurred at month 4 is a significant step. We're certainly ahead of where we were in previous years in terms of getting those sorted. So those are good news items. It's early in the year, still relatively on the capital front. There is a projected underspend of nearly 16 million at the moment, but I suspect that will change during the course of the year. And I think probably that is all I need to say at this stage, and I'm sure you'll hit some of the details a bit further on. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Bianco. Looking at the recommendations, the recommendation 1 is to note the forecast budget position that Councillor Bianco has just outlined. Recommendation 2, to note the Treasury Management Update as of July 17, Appendix E, which is page 73. And no change there in that we are only receiving 0.44% on the 100 million that we have invested and paying 3.37% on the 64 million debt. There were no breaches of the prudential indicators or non-compliances with Treasury management policies and practices in this period. And there are no scheduled debt repayments or early debt repayment opportunities during this period either, in July. Recommendation 3, this is to continue the delegated authority of myself and the Chief Executive regarding consultancy and agency assignments over 50k. That's those that run up and over 50k, some over a period of time. The details shown on page 74 and the next couple of pages. Recommendation 4, this is to agree the introduction of a new charge of £192.50 for food hygiene rating schemes, re-rating inspection, with effect from the 6th of October. Currently, businesses that have obtained a food hygiene rating of less than 5 can ask to be re-rated, and there is no charge for the re-rating. In fact, they can ask again to be re-rated if they still haven't got a 5. So in cases, from now on, in cases unless it's us that are requesting the re-rating, we will charge for that, them trying to get their score up, as it were. Recommendation 5, this is to approve acceptance of gift funding in relation to some planning performance agreements, and they are detailed, the ABC there. Recommendation 6, to the acceptance of grant funding of 199k from Transport for London for the 17-18 Bridge Assessment and Strengthening Programme. This is money from Transport for London. It's assessments for interim measures and strengthening for 8 identified bridges and structures across the borough. Recommendation 7, approve acceptance of additional one-off funding to the value of 80k from the National Trading Standards. This is to do with our safety inspections at Heathrow that we are obliged to carry out as a port of entry. And recommendation 8, and as Councillor Bianco said, there are 2 additional items attached to this. This is to ratify the decisions that I've taken together with the Member for Finance and Property and Business Services under special urgency provisions. The ones that are listed here are all, I think, yes, to do with the acceleration of fire safety work that we are doing, that I've mentioned at Council, and members are getting updated on that. I've asked that that be done. The 2 additional ones that we've received tonight, we've agreed to acquire 13 new built 3-bedroom houses on the former British Legion Club site. We will acquire them all at what we refer to as a package price, which is a reasonable price for taking them all. And the second one is that we apply for some viability funding from the Housing Infrastructure Fund for some work in the Hayes housing zone. There are 2 decisions that have been recently taken. I think, as Councillor Bianco said, a sound position at month 4, while there's still some challenges ahead. We have 87% of required savings already banked or on track, and that is quite an achievement. With year-end projected balances of 42 million, it gives us a sound financial base going forward. Any other comments? If not, are the recommendations, including the addendum sheet, agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 9, page 79, School Capital Programme update. Councillor Simmons.
Thank you, Leader. The report is now coming less frequently, as suggested, as the Council continues to make good progress with the Schools Capital Programme, and it has become a bit of a repetitive exercise, saying that at every Cabinet meeting. So this is one of the less frequent and therefore slightly more detailed updates for members to take note of. Particularly ask scrutiny, we're noting recommendation 5, to waive the call-in on item 4 in order that we can proceed as quickly as possible with the work at Grange Park Infants, Grange Park Junior Schools, given the challenges that they face with their buildings. I mean, overall, the picture in the borough remains at fairly steady state. We're seeing signs that the pressure of primary school places is beginning to plateau. So as expected, pretty much, the rise in birth rates has taken that birth rate up to a higher level, but that rate of increase is now levelled off. And pretty much inevitably, as children make their way through school, of course they grow, and in due course they need a secondary school place. I think the biggest challenge we face around secondary schools is the lack of action on the part of the Education and Schools Funding Agency. There are lots of rumours about what they may be doing, but as of today, I don't believe they have actually been in to talk to our planners about any site anywhere in the borough for which they can construct the new 6th form of entry secondary school, for which they've granted 2 local bids the right to go forward. So we are at present none the wiser about that. The programmes that have been run and are still being managed by the Council continue to progress extremely well, and it seems, hopefully, that a line has been drawn under the delays at the Abbotsfield and Swakely site, which is being managed by the Education Skills Funding Agency, where although there have been those delays, we think we've now got to the point where we can be confident that by December the building will be finished and the school will therefore be ready for occupation in January next year. With those comments, I'll open for any further points people might wish to make.
That being the case, are those recommendations agreed? Thank you. And I again would remind Executive Scrutiny Committee that we're requesting a waiver so we can move on with those works Grange Park infants. And Junior. Agenda item 10, page